In this video, we're going to learn about all the properties of water, and we'll learn why water is such an important biological molecule. The images and examples, for the most part, have been adapted from our Cognitive Higher Level Biology textbook. So, water is considered the medium for life. All theories about the origin of life hold that water is a foundational molecule. Water lets molecules for life interact with one another, and water allowed for compartments and organelles to be made within the cell that had conditions that were different from the surrounding environment. And all living things rely on water since cell cytoplasm is mainly water. We will revisit the concept of metabolism a little bit later in this unit as well as in the next unit, but we'll talk about it a little bit here. So metabolism is all of the cell's chemical reactions, and these are catalyzed by enzymes. So there's anabolism, which is the synthesis of complex molecules from simple molecules, and this requires energy. So we're very soon learn about condensation reactions. So basically you're putting two molecules together to make a larger molecule, and sometimes that happens on a very large scale, so you make a polymer. Catabolism, on the other hand, is breaking down complex molecules into simpler molecules. This releases energy, and the types of reactions that happen here are called hydrolysis reactions. And again, in our next lesson on carbohydrates, we'll learn about both anabolism and catabolism. So now we're going to take a look at the structure of water. Water is made of one oxygen atom covalently bonded to two hydrogens. Oxygen is more electronegative than hydrogen. So in grade 11 chemistry, we learned about electronegativity. So that means that oxygen is holding the electrons in the shared bonds closer to oxygen and hogging them from hydrogen. Oxygen also has two unpaired electrons, which gives the molecule a bent shape and makes it a polar molecule. So if you remember from the Lewis structure, we don't have the lone pairs of electrons showing here, but they would be right there. And the oxygen then will have what is called a negative dipole, which is this symbol right here, and the hydrogen atoms have a positive dipole. So that makes it a polar molecule because one side of the molecule is partially positive and one side of the molecule is partially negative. And that will come into huge implications on the properties of water. So again, in grade 11 biology, you would have spent some time talking about hydrogen bonding. And that's when the positive dipole of a water molecule gets attracted to the negative dipole of an adjacent water molecule, forming hydrogen bonds. And these hydrogen bonds you would have learned about last year when you were learning about how the two strands of DNA hold together. But in terms of water, there's a strong hydrogen bonding happening between the hydrogens and the oxygens, those dipoles. These intermolecular forces are weaker than covalent bonds, but they are the strongest of the intermolecular forces, and they will break and reform with other molecules. So the covalent bonds are much stronger and they won't break. So covalent bonds hold the molecule together. If they break, then the molecule ceases to exist in its form and it forms a new molecule. But hydrogen bonds can break and reform repetitively throughout the solution of water or whatever substance you're talking about. Now we're going to talk about some of the specific properties of water. So water undergoes a concept called cohesion, and that's when water molecules are sticking to one another because of the hydrogen bonding. And this leads to increased surface tension, and this is what allows some bugs to be able to walk on water due to that property. And this can actually be impacted by pollution because they can impact the surface tension. Like if you have an oil slick over the top of the water, that cohesion won't happen as strongly. So the water bugs might not be able to walk on the water there. Cohesion also lets a stream of water move up the xylem of a plant. Sometimes it can move even as far as 10 meters in height. And again, you would have learned about that in the plant unit in grade 11 biology. And during this transpiration pull, as one molecule evaporates from the leaf, the whole column of water gets to be pulled upwards, thanks to that cohesion. Adhesion, on the other hand, is when water molecules are sticking to other polar molecules or charged particles. And this will allow the action of capillary action, which is when water is being pulled up a tube. It's also what explains when a meniscus forms inside a pipette or burette, where you see that curvature in the water level. So when you're reading the volume of a graduated cylinder or other substance that shows a meniscus, you always read from the bottom of the meniscus, not where it reaches up the sides of the tube. So water is also called the universal solvent. More substances can dissolve in water than any other liquid. So substances that can dissolve in water are called hydrophilic, meaning they like water or they love water. So ionic compounds will dissociate into ions in water, so they're considered hydrophilic as well. Polar molecules will dissolve in water. Non-polar molecules won't dissolve. They're called hydrophobic. They don't like water. They repel water. And because water is such a good solvent and can dissolve so many things, it makes an excellent transport mode for the body. So our blood is actually just over 50% water. The plasma portion of our blood carries all our dissolved nutrients and even dissolved gases and so on. So it is an excellent transport medium. Unfortunately, because water is such a good solvent, it can dissolve things that we don't necessarily want to be dissolved. So for a long time, people used to use the term, the solution to pollution is dilution. So if you have a little bit of chemical that you don't want anymore, just pour it down the drain because it'll mix with the water and be carried away and dissipate and not be a problem. But if everyone does that, then we actually are polluting our waterways to a level that's toxic to us and to wildlife. So hydrophilic molecules, they're water-loving. They dissolve readily in water, as I mentioned in the last slide. Polar and ionic compounds have positive and negative charges or dipoles and are attracted to the water. So examples of hydrophilic molecules would be sugar or salt because they're polar or ionic. Many cell reactions actually need water to occur because the molecules themselves are hydrophilic. And most enzymes catalyze their reactions in an aqueous solution, so dissolved in water in the cytoplasm, most often. Hydrophobic molecules, on the other hand, are water-fearing, as I mentioned before. So non-polar molecules will be repelled by water, but they'll be attracted to other hydrophobic molecules. The term like dissolves like applies here. So hydrophilic things will dissolve other hydrophilic things. They'll all mix together, and hydrophobic things all mix together. So when we eat fatty foods, because fats are hydrophobic, as we'll learn a little bit later, they all clump together into a blob in our digestive system. And that's why we need bile to emulsify the fats, to separate all the attracted fat molecules apart again so the enzymes can work on them and break down the fat. So some examples of hydrophobic molecules are oil or methane. And the hydrophobic part of the cell membrane actually is important because it provides a barrier between the cell and the outside environment. So it actually is what gives that cell membrane that semi-permeability, so it only lets some things through readily. Water also has buoyancy. So water is denser than air, so it counteracts the force of gravity through its buoyancy. Air, having a lower density, has a much lower buoyancy. So when ice freezes, its structure actually becomes more open, unlike other solids, and that makes it less dense than liquid water, and then it floats. And that's what allows living things to live under the surface of the water in winter, because ice floats and then there's still liquid water below it. So viscosity, if you remember from the properties of matter from grade 9 and 10, is how easily a substance flows. So water has a low viscosity for a liquid, but it does still have a higher viscosity than air. Thermal conductivity is how easily heat will disperse through a substance. Water has a higher thermal conductivity than other liquids, except for liquid metals. It also has a much higher conductivity than air. Specific heat capacity refers to how much energy needs to be absorbed before the temperature changes. So water has a high specific heat capacity because it can absorb or lose a lot of heat energy before changing temperature. That's because of the hydrogen bonding between the water molecules. They have to be broken to be able to alter the state of water. And that high heat capacity is also what prevents lakes from freezing and allows us to cool ourselves through evaporative cooling or through sweating. Air and land have a much lower specific heat capacity. That's why the water temperature doesn't change drastically overnight and from day to day, whereas the air temperature and the land temperature can change quite significantly throughout the course of a day. So we need to know about two animals and talk about how they deal with the different conditions between air and water and land. One of them is the ring-tailed seal, and the other one is the black-throated loon. So we're going to talk about those separately. So first of all, the ring-tailed seal. They live mostly in the water, but they also spend time on the ice. Their body is a torpedo shape, which makes it very hydrodynamic, so it can flow through the water very easily. So it can swim very smoothly. It also has a layer of lower density blubber, which makes the seal buoyant. It has powerful flippers to help propel it through the water and swim with precision. But on land, its movements are very awkward, so it doesn't get around very well. Ringtail seals also use layers. Ringtail seals are Pusa hispida, the Latin name, but you only need to refer to them by their common name. They have their pups in air-filled layers. When they're born, the pups don't have a lot of blubber, so they can't swim for very long because they're not as buoyant, and they also don't have the thermal insulation to protect them from the cold water, so they have to have just short swim periods. The layers that are built or lived in are also designed to protect them from the colder air temperatures because the trapped air will be able to absorb the heat and won't be exposed to the elements. However, melting ice due to climate change makes it really hard to build these protective layers because there's not as much ice anymore, and this is endangering the ring-tailed seal pups as well as any other Arctic dwelling animal. The second animal is the black-throated loon. It spends time in the air, the water, and the land, also in the Arctic area. Its body shape is both hydrodynamic, so it can swim through the water, and aerodynamic, so it can fly. The water is more viscous than the air, obviously, so that it's able to swim well based on its body shape, and it has enough lift to be able to fly in the less buoyant air. The loon has large wings to provide the lift that it needs to fly, and it has two types of feathers. So the inner feathers are made of down. They have low thermal conductivity, and they can trap air to keep it warm. The outer feathers are oily, and they're tightly woven together, and that makes the bird waterproof and actually protects the insulating layers of feathers below. So the question is, where did the water come from in the first place? So scientists inferred that water arrived on Earth through many collisions with water-rich asteroids or comets. The water remained on Earth because of its gravitational pull, and as the Earth started to cool, the water vapor condensed and covered the Earth, and this allowed for life to begin to develop. Earth is considered to be in the Goldilocks zone, so its distance from the sun is just right to allow liquid water to exist. And Earth is also the right temperature to sustain life. It's not too hot, nor is it too cold. And I would recommend going and finding the video on the Goldilocks zone to see more information about that. So there is a reading task from Cognity, Cognity 1.15, and you're to discuss the following questions with your partner, your elbow partner, in relation to the properties of water. Would you expect the feet of water striders to be polar or non-polar? Why or why not? How and why does water act differently on a freshly waxed car compared with an unwaxed car? What factors affect how far capillary action can move water against gravity? How might your body transport materials like oxygen, gas, and lipids, fats, that are not very soluble in water? So research the answers to check your thinking, and then think of 3 other natural phenomena that relate to these properties of water. We also need to talk about why hydrogen is so important. So hydrogen makes up 75% of the mass of the universe and 90% of the atoms. It can covalently bond with almost all nonmetals. Its ability to bond with oxygen and carbon are why life can exist. It forms hydrogen bonds when its positive dipoles interact with the negative dipoles of oxygen, nitrogen, and other highly electronegative atoms. And hydrogen bonds are pivotal in holding the 2 strands of DNA together. And as you know from grade 11, DNA is the genetic material. We can't have life without it. Water can act as a solvent, so it can dissolve polar molecules in ionic compounds. The negative dipoles or ions will be attracted to water's positive dipoles, and its positive dipoles and ions will be attracted to its negative dipoles. Water molecules will surround the ions and molecules and form what are called hydration cells, which you can see here. There's one there, and there's another hydration shell there. And that's what allows solutes to disperse throughout the solvent. So we had, this is a solution of sodium chloride, and you can see these hydration shells being formed around both the chloride, the negative one, with interactions with the positive dipoles of water, and then the positive sodium ion is interacting with the negative dipoles of water. So now we'll talk about water potential. That's the measure of the potential energy of water per unit of volume of water relative to the potential energy of water at standard conditions. So if you remember from chemistry, that's 20 degrees Celsius in atmospheric pressure. It usually measures this in kilopascals or bars. 1 bar is equal to 100 kilopascals. Pure water at standard conditions has a water potential of 0 kilopascals. That's the highest value it can have. The more negative the value, the harder it is for water to move. So if we look at this example here, we have lower solute concentrations, which means that there's more free water molecules and a higher water potential. If you have a higher solute condition, there's fewer free water molecules available, so that means there's a lower water potential. So water potential is impacted by both the solute potential and the pressure potential. And it's equal to the water potential is equal to the solute potential added to the pressure potential. And this is the symbol for water potential and solute and so on. So solute potential is the attraction of water molecules to solute molecules. The more solute that's present, the fewer free water molecules there are present to move. In the example to the right, if you add more solute to one side of a U-tube, that will lower the solute potential, and water will move for the area of higher solute potential. So you can see that there's more potential here moving over there. Pressure potential is the physical pressure acting on a system. So positive pressure potential increases the water potential and presses out from a cell like root pressure and root hair cells. Negative pressure potential decreases the water potential and acts like a suction, like the xylem during transportation. So in this example, the first one, applying positive pressure to the left side will increase the pressure potential, making the water move to the right side of the tube. And then applying negative pressure, so reducing basically the pressure to the left side, creates lower water or pressure potential, meaning that the water will move to the left side of the tube. Now we're going to take a look at this in terms of hypertonic and hypotonic environments. First, we'll look at hypotonic. So the solute potential of the plant cell is lower than the potential of the water, forcing the water to move into the cell. So it goes from an area of high to low solute potential. This will increase the turgor pressure of the cell, which means the cell membrane will press against the cell wall, which means that the pressure potential is positive relative to the outside of the cell. Eventually, those two potentials will balance each other out, returning the water potential to zero. So you can see initially the pressure potential was 0, but the solute potential was -2, so the water potential was -2. But then as water enters the cell, it causes pressure on the cell membrane, so that increases the pressure potential to +2, so then you get a 0 for your water potential again to counteract the solute potential. So let's look at the example for a hypertonic environment. So that's when the solute concentration is higher outside the cell. So a plant cell in the hypertonic environment has a higher solute potential than the solution. So water will move out to balance the solute potential on each side of the membrane, which means that the volume of the cell will decrease, which will decrease the pressure potential too. And because of both of those have decreased, the water potential becomes negative, as you can see in the final. Because the water potential is negative 0.732. The solute potential is also negative 0.732. So then the pressure potential is 0.